This lesson, we're going to be setting up our gameplay variables. We're going to need one variable that's going to hold our current card value. This is going to be a global variable, and it's going to be changing, so I'm going to make it a let, and also give it a name, current card value. And currently, we'll just set that at 0. And we're going to use that throughout the script in order to track what the current card is and what the current card value is. We also need to track our score. Set this up as score value because I already used the variable score, so I need another variable. So I'm setting this one up as score 0. We also need to have some variables that are going to be holding the deck, and this is going to be an array. We're going to build this out using JavaScript. Also some default card settings. So these actually can be const because they're not changing. And we can call this the ranks. So these are all of the card ranks that we potentially will have. So we'll have some cards. So starting at 2, working all the way up to our jacks. So this is going to be a string value. And this is how we're going to know what to output for the user. So essentially, we're going to be using this for visual representation of the cards. In addition to that, we know that our cards are going to have different suits. Let's set up an array for the suits as well. The suits that I'm going to be using are going to be also useful when we're using the ASC characters. So we'll set one up as hearts, diamonds. So we're going to use a short format for that. And I'll show you why later on in the upcoming lessons, why we're using that shorter format. So clubs and lastly, spades. And this is going to also help with the output of those values. So now that we've set up basically our default variables, we're ready to build out our deck of cards using these values, and then also to keep track of what's happening during the gameplay with these two. We also need to make sure that the buttons are doing something. So let's set that up where we're going to loop through all of the available buttons. So set up a variable. And you can do different loops for this. So we're just going to do a basic for loop. And we're looping through all of the button object. And it's got a length because it's a node list. And then increment I, so we can break out of our loop. And then selecting a button. And as we loop through, so first I'll show you what we're going to be outputting as we're looping through. And as we loop through and we output these objects individually, that means that we can work with those as well. So you can see that we've got the start button that represented there. We've got the first higher button and then the second button. So it's all being represented there. And we want to add event listeners to those buttons. So as we iterate through them within the loop, this is where we can add an event listener. Adding an event listener, and the event listener that we want to add in is a click. And we'll link it to a variable, call that, or a function, call that play game. And then just below, let's set up our function. So this is a default one that's just going to hold that. Console log. And for now, we're just going to type clicked there. So now that every time we click one of our buttons, we should see clicked showing up within the console. And that we do. And we can also get rid of this to avoid some of that confusing content that's being shown here within the console. So you see we've got clicked. So all of our buttons are now functional. So we're ready to move on to the next step. So go ahead and set up the variables. Also set up the content for the card deck so that we can build out the deck in the next lesson. Add in the event listener for the buttons going through, looping through that node list. And then set up a default function that can house any of the clicks, that can respond to any of the clicks. And for now, we're going to keep console log clicked in there. Go ahead and set that up in your own project.